In this video, we're going to look at some of the events that are heating up in the Middle East, Ukraine, and possibly in your area before the summer ends. We're also going to cover both the powder keg that continues to move us closer to a world war and the crop failures and wildfires that we're seeing as a result of increasingly more severe and record-breaking weather. I don't know about you, but I'm getting tired of the term record-breaking. But we have to talk about it because it's increasingly impacting our food supply, and we're going to continue to do so in the future. You're also going to want to stick around to the end to really understand the solutions that I'm continuing to work on and what you can do to prepare for what I think is inevitably coming. Plus, we're going to do another great giveaway that you're going to want to know about, so let's go ahead and jump in. If you're new to this channel, my name is Chris, and on this channel we discuss emergency preparedness, aka prepping. Now, every week I try to break down what I think are really the most telling and threatening global threats and their potential impact on all of our lives, even if you're far away from the conflict zone, to really help you make informed decisions about what and how you can prepare. And as always, I want to really help you turn down the anxiety about the future and transition that into action to really build a more secure future. And to do that, you really have to understand the biggest threats that we're facing. Now, first, we begin with problems in the Middle East. Israel attacks. Tensions in the Middle East have escalated following a suspected Israeli assassination that killed a senior Hamas leader, Ismail Haniyeh, in Tehran, Iran. Now, a bomb planted months before was remotely detonated in the guest house where he was staying, killing both him and his bodyguard instantly. And the supposition is that this was Israel, which is probably likely true, but it isn't confirmed and may never be. And that doesn't have to happen for Iran to retaliate. At the start of the war, there were only 4 high-ranking Hamas leaders, and with the death of Haniyeh, only 1 remains. Now, the strike immediately prompted threats of revenge from Iran, with the supreme leader Ayatollah promising harsh punishment. And Hamas and its allies, including Hezbollah and the Houthis, vowed to retaliate, marking the event of a significant escalation. Now, the retaliation comes after Hezbollah terrorists attacked a football field in Israel's occupied Golan Heights, killing 12 young people, including children. Now, hours before the strike, Haniyeh set aside other leaders from Iran's axis of resistance, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, during the swearing in of Iran's new president. And the leaders, dressed in suits, occupied the front row at the event. Now, in the months since the October 7th massacre, during which Hamas killed 1,200 people in Israel, some 35,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces. And of the 250 Israelis taken hostage, many remain in Gaza, with around about a third presumed dead. And you may remember back in April, Iran retaliated for Israel's bombing of its embassy in Damascus by launching around 170 drones, over 30 cruise missiles, and more than 120 ballistic missiles toward Israel and the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. Now, 98% of those were shot down between Israel and its allies. So, should Israel be concerned? The situation is really different because the attack happened in Tehran and not Syria. And with the attack on their own soil, we can expect Iran's retaliation to be severe. Now, the retaliation will also likely be more coordinated between Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, and Iran. And Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had previously pledged retaliation after a deadly attack by Hezbollah in the Golan Heights at a soccer field that killed 12 people, again, many of them children. Now, this incident, coupled with the ongoing conflict between Israel and the various Iranian-backed groups, has heightened fears of an all-out war in the region as Israeli defense forces prepare for potential invasions and counterattacks from Iranian-backed groups across the Middle East. Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen. Now, Hezbollah alone has 30 to 50,000 fighters, between 120,000 to 200,000 missiles, rockets, and drones, so that Israel would have a hard time defending against air attacks from the north, east, and south simultaneously. Now, what works in Israel's favor is that these missiles and drones require staging and launch areas. They can't just all be simultaneously launched. Now, that being said, if this retaliation is anything like the previous one, but with more effort to overwhelm Israel's air defense, we're likely going to see attacks around the 13th of this month. It took Iran 12 days to assemble the retaliatory strike in April. So, here's the thing. You may be asking yourself, what's really new with this? It's really chapter 27,741 of who knows and how many more, and you wouldn't be wrong. But the difference here is that the sanctions over Iran's nuclear program have put its economy in a very precarious spot. Add to that Iran's funding of multiple militant groups and a heavy focus on manufacturing missiles and drones, and they have clearly overextended themselves. Now, Iranian media reported that the country's treasury balance is currently 105 trillion rials, about 170 million USD, which is insufficient to cover even just a few days of government salaries. And this financial crisis is exacerbated by international sanctions, mismanagement, and disruptions in oil exports, leading to shortages in essential imports and raw materials. And despite these economic challenges, the Iranian regime persists in funding regional interventions in conflicts such as those in Lebanon and Palestine. So, did Iran just overextend itself? Israel's July 20th attack on an oil refinery owned by Yemen has really sent a clear message to Iran, highlighting Israel's capability to disrupt crucial energy assets in the Middle East. Now, the strike, while targeting Yemen infrastructure, signals Israel's readiness to really potentially target Iran's critical oil infrastructure, such as Kark Island, which is vital for Iran's oil exports and geopolitical leverage. Now, approximately 8 million barrels of oil daily flow through Kark, which most of it goes to China. And if Kark Island is attacked in an Israeli strike, China's economy would be dealt a tremendous blow. Russia is the only other major oil supplier to China, but they're not really in a position to fill the void because they have to get their oil to China through a slow fleet of tankers. And an attack on the Kark Island would have such a tremendous global impact, and restructuring that, even Israel's allies probably don't want to see that actually happen. We will, of course, know more about around the middle of this month, but I think we can expect that Iran's retaliation will probably be at least as strong as their April assault, and Israel will likely strike back on Iranian soil. That's going to escalate this conflict and may have a global impact that will even get worse than it is currently. So yes, it's another chapter of war in the Middle East that will never end, but brace for it to get rather intense this month. This means that you as a prepper, no matter where you live, that global economic stability could be pushed over the edge. China could be forced into a more significant partnership with Russia to fill the void, and while BRICS may be suffering as a whole, so too will the economies of many nations. So this one powder keg could quickly become a new chapter in a new World War III book. What do you think? What are you doing to prepare for the possibility of a looming World War III? Let us know in the comments below. Ukraine. So here's where Ukraine comes into the picture, with fears of Tehran and Russia having one more reason to align themselves more closely against the West. Now, French President Emmanuel Macron urged Iranian President Mossad to halt support for Russia's aggression against Ukraine and to avoid escalating conflicts in the Middle East, including urging restraint following recent tensions between Israel and Hezbollah. Now, Macron also called for Iran to end its nuclear program's escalation and demanded the release of 3 French nationalists held in Iranian prisons, framing the release as essential for improving relations between France and Iran. At least all the sides are still talking, as evidenced by the largest post-Soviet prisoner swap on Thursday, with Moscow releasing Wall Street journalist Evan Gershkovich and American Paul Whelan in exchange for several other detainees. Now, the complex deal, which involved months of secretive negotiations, also saw the release of journalists, political activists, and alleged sleeper agents, with President Biden and Vice President Harris set to welcome the returned Americans at Joint Base Andrews. Now, both sides may be talking about that because they don't want to talk about the alarming escalation of a nuclear threat. Russia has announced plans to train its troops in occupied Ukraine on the use of tactical nuclear weapons, focusing on ballistic missiles and various aircraft. Now, the exercise is really aimed to prepare Russian forces for the deployment of non-strategic nuclear weapons, with specific training on handling special ammunition and covert operations. Now, this development follows ongoing threats from Moscow about the potential use of nuclear weapons in response to Western support for Ukraine, the U.S. threat to deploy long-range missiles in Germany, Poland's desire to host NATO member nukes in retaliation to Russia's deployment of strategic nuclear warheads in Belarus, and recent calls within Russia for tactical nuclear strikes to protect occupied territories. Now, that's a lot of nuclear pieces that are beginning to move around the geopolitical chessboard, and that's always a cause for concern from a prepping standpoint. Also, the first F-16 fighter jets from NATO allies have arrived in Ukraine, really marking a significant step in boosting the country's defense capabilities against Russian attacks. Now, despite initial delays and logistical issues, including a language barrier for Ukrainian pilots and concerns over runways, the delivery is expected to enhance Ukraine's air defenses and counter Russia's aerial superiority. Now, additionally, the U.S. will provide these jets with advanced missiles and munitions to support Ukraine's military needs. And while Ukraine may not be 100% operational with the F-16s, they are increasingly more capable. They could potentially take the fight further into Russian territory than anyone in the Kremlin would like. This week, Ukraine did strike against Russia through a cyber attack. Now, Ukraine's military intelligence completed a significant cyber attack targeting Russia's financial institutions and telecommunications, disrupting major banks and government websites. And this week-long distributed denial of service, or DDoS, attack campaign is really described as one of the largest in history. Not only affected Russia's top banks, but also obtained a substantial amount of confidential data. And this bold move really underscores Ukraine's growing capability to strike deep into Russian infrastructure following earlier cyber attacks that targeted Russian websites and disrupted communications in occupied territories. And finally, yesterday, Poland and NATO allies launched Eastern Aurora, a major air defense operation that was aimed at bolstering Polish airspace security amid ongoing tensions with Russia. Now, this operation will run alongside the Safe Podlasie initiative, which deploys 17,000 troops to the Polish-Belarusian border in response to a migratory crisis linked to Belarusian policies. Now, Eastern Aurora will enhance Poland's air defense with support from American, British, and Italian forces, focusing on airspace monitoring and responses to potential incursions. Anytime large military forces are operating in close proximity, there's the potential for an explosive kinetic conflict. And the alternative, I suppose, is to do nothing in the face of aggression, but as a prepper, I think our focus should be on preparing in case one of these powder kegs flares up. So what do you think? Is the war in Ukraine about to spill over Ukraine's borders? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Giveaway. This week, we're going to give away a 72-hour survival box of food, water, and a thermal blanket, all in one kit. All you have to do to participate in the giveaway is just simply comment on this video, give it a thumbs up, and complete the giveaway form that's linked in the description section below. Now, this information is only accessible to our team, and what we'll do is we'll use a random selection tool, we'll choose a winner from the comments, and then reach out via the email that you provided on the submitted form. And I'll be honest, even with over 1 million subscribers, there's not a lot that enter these giveaways, but we love having them. I'm just saying that your odds of winning are better than you might think. So congratulations to our last giveaway winner for the tactical gallon jug sleeve, Dottie Cunningham. We're going to get that sent right out to you. High heat warning. With war heating up in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict and the conflict in the Middle East, I'm also concerned about the heat of a different kind, the heat that you may be feeling already this summer in the Northern Hemisphere. Look, I'll be honest. I'm shocked at how little coverage this really gets and how easily it's dismissed by so many as non-consequential. Maybe the scientists are tired of trying to explain it, and many are still in denial, but the rapid warming that we're seeing now continues to set new heat records. Farmers worldwide are seeing it, global leaders are seeing it, scientists see it, and you might be feeling it as well. Now, we're currently witnessing the effects of drier and hotter temperatures, which have led to an abundance of fuel for wildfires. Several large fires in California are barely contained at the moment. I know this is anecdotal, but about an hour east of where I live, we're having massive fires, ironically in an area that I almost bought land, which I'll talk about more in a moment. According to CAL FIRE, more than 768,000 acres have burned statewide since the beginning of 2024, which is a significant increase compared to 26,000 acres at this time last year. And this 5-year average for this period is roughly about 166,000 acres burned. But the Northern Hemisphere saw record-breaking wildfires in 2023, especially impacting boreal forests. And with summer only halfway through, it's clear that this year's fire season is likely to be worse than last year's historic levels. I'm personally having to hire some people with this issue specifically for the new homestead, which I just purchased, which I mentioned on the channel last week. The smoke and the ash from wildfires, they can extend their impact hundreds of miles even from their epicenter. The clearing of the land they leave behind ends up resulting in flood when rain actually does come. So fires are a real threat here, and I'll come back in just a moment and tell you what I'm doing about that. I'm even more concerned about the impact of these extended periods of heat on our food supply, and that's really the biggest concern for me. Let's be honest, if a crop this or that fails, the U.S. is in a good position to pivot to something else. There's a few countries around the world that are in such a good position. Many, though, are not, and many countries just can't simply pivot to another food source. Now, as we covered in an earlier news video, crop failures are already affecting food output, leading to inflation. China and India, which produce nearly half of the world's rice, are experiencing reduced harvest due to extreme weather. Now, this issue extends beyond just rice, impacting various crops like soybeans and wheat, with changing weather patterns outpacing agricultural advancements. And both countries have increased grain imports from Russia as extreme weather events like India's heat dome become more common. Is it any surprise that both India and China are so dramatically partnering with and forming trade deals with heavily sanctioned Russia? The fact is, Russia eyes Ukraine for more than just their claim on historical affinity. Ukraine is known as Europe's breadbasket, and any world leader knows that controlling the food controls the people. I was going to let you finish that sentence. Russia is assessing significant crop damage caused by a rare sub-zero snap in May of this year, which affected vital wheat and oilseed regions. Now, this freeze, with temperatures dropping to -6°C, devastated 265,000 and led to emergency declarations in the affected areas. Now, the adverse weather, compounded by a dry spring, has prompted Russia to lower its 2024 to 2025 wheat harvest estimate to 91 million tons, possibly resulting in a third of the fruit crop being lost. And it's these swings from hot to cold that create unstable conditions, and plants require some level of consistency in hot, cold, and moisture levels to set fruit from flowers and harvest. Several subsequent years of extremely low yield might wipe out one year's bumper crop. I recently spoke to a friend up north where I live, whose garden and orchards have suffered tremendously and failed because of the extreme heat. They lost about 80% of it at this point already in the summer. My pomegranate tree and olive tree, which gave me copious amounts of fruit last year, are barely laden this year because of relentless high heat and no rain. Now, consistency in temperature and precipitation, it's lacking as this crisis deepens. And that's why the real threat often gets overlooked as well. As one region may suffer greatly, another may be having a bumper crop. For instance, global soybean harvests have faced challenges this year with lower yields in many regions, but the U.S. production has surged to 4.5 billion bushels, an 8% increase from this time last year. Now, this U.S. bumper crop could help stabilize global soybean supplies and prices amid broader agricultural difficulties. Now, however, the U.S. is not across the board experiencing a bountiful harvest. While inflation has cooled, this summer's extreme heat is causing a rise in fruit and vegetable prices due to higher growing costs. Now, farmers are facing reduced harvest and increased expenses, which may lead to higher consumer prices in the coming years, despite current contracts keeping prices stable. And this balancing act between countries suffering and bountiful has really worked up to this point. But the problem that I see is that we're experiencing more failures across the board than we are gains. Corporate farming results in selling food to the highest bidder, and that may not be your local store, your regional manufacturer, or your processor. Transportation costs and prices, they go up, and eventually there's not a way to pivot out of it. It's increasingly less likely for a country to seek the food it needs to fill the gaps when countries like India and China begin to hoard grain as their crops fail. And I think food scarcity issues will increase in probability as the weather continues in its trend of extreme and sharply oscillating record-breaking temperatures for more extended periods. Now look, if you prep for anything in the coming months, I would encourage you to prep your food supply. Prep by learning to produce some of what you eat, from something as simple as a windowsill garden to a plot of land. Learn to cook and preserve your food. I'm currently working with a PhD scientist who specializes in consulting with the USDA and farmers to help them prepare for these temperature fluctuations. I will be bringing her here on the channel shortly for various interviews to really help us understand where this is all heading and how we can practically prepare. So what do you think? Are you experiencing a withering harvest because of extreme weather, or are you experiencing bumper crops? Let us know in the comments section below how your region is faring. All right, so faced with these realities, I'll tell you some of what I'm proactively doing. I try to leave these heavy news segments with a little of my own long-term prepping. Facing these challenges, potential weather and food supply chain disruptions, a world war that we can't avoid, here's what I'm doing. As I shared last week on the channel, I did close escrow on a piece of property. It's a couple acres here in my area. And what I'm doing is every day I keep getting up and I'm like, all right, let's do this. And it's, to be honest, it's overwhelming because I'm starting with a piece of property from scratch and I'm having to figure out how do I go through this? And I'll document this here on the channel. But where I'm at right now is focusing on securing the property from both the security standpoint, which I'll be installing security and other measures here shortly, But the biggest way I'm trying to secure the property is through fire prevention. Where this house is at is in a high fire risk area. Unfortunately, everything where I live is considered high fire risk. Our insurance, as you can imagine, is through the roof. So good news is I have a neighbor who is a retired fireman, and his specialty was he would go into communities in Pasadena, California, and he would advise people how to prepare their land, the things they need to do, write citations, tell people to get their houses in order, their property in order, because if they don't, it would catch on fire and destroy all the surrounding houses. So that was his job. So he came out to my property with me today. Several things that he identified, but overall his assessment was this property is a winner, is the term he kept using. He's like, you got a winner. It's cleared off. It's, most of it is dirt. I think the previous owner had a lot of sheep that they let loose on the property. So I'll probably be buying some sheep here soon, at least in the winter, getting ready for the spring. But he identified that overall it was in good shape. There were some things that he recommended I do. Namely, there are three eucalyptus trees in the middle of the property, and his recommendation is to top those, to pull them back a little. I had an arborist come in today, and he gave me an estimate. And the good news is that he is a very ethical guy, and he's highly respected in our community and often referred. And his thing was, hey, don't cut them now. Wait till later, end of October, beginning of November, because if you cut them now, they're going to get infested with bugs and they'll probably die. And he's like, I need the work. We're slow on work, but I don't want to see your trees die. So we're going to tackle those later and just hope for the best in the meantime. Now, again, the point of this property is to use it as a teaching ground. We're going to be building out a lot of various models over the next several years with this property. And again, because I'm city prepping, we're going to section off a typical suburban size yard, and we're going to develop in that. And obviously I can develop on a lot of other pieces on the property to both do a suburban size yard and to do other homesteading projects. So it kind of gives us a lot of opportunities, and I'm pretty excited. So next, what I'm focusing on at the moment is the barn. There's a barn that's on the property they converted and permitted into a house. I'm going to be converted, I think I mentioned this last week, into my studio. But the big thing I'm going to be doing is turning it into an off-grid project. And I've got a local contractor that I work with on a lot of solar projects here on my house. He's coming in, and we're installing transfer switches, 120 plugins, 240 plugins, so that I can plug a lot of these solar generators that I test. The problem is when I've reviewed these units in the past, I kind of have to tell you hypothetically based off a spreadsheet what they can power for how long. It's kind of hard for people to visualize that. So we're going to plug it in, turn the transfer switch on, transfer over to these units. We can power the house, the things like air conditioners, refrigerators, stovetops, all these things that you get an idea of what can be powered at 120 for how long and 240 for how long. And so I'm going to be using that as an environment to teach, because I keep getting these same emails. People are like, well, how long can I power this? How long can I power my refrigerator or freezer? Well, we're going to be using that environment to show in real time how to do all this. Again, I'm going to be focusing on fire resistance as a big priority. Water in my area, as you can imagine, is it's a luxury, right? Because I live in a very dry area. It's the Inland Empire. It's very dry here. So as I mentioned on the channel before, I've got a creek that runs behind the property. And so I'm going to build a dam system, pump water up for that, especially in this winter when we get a lot of rain. It has a well on the property. That's how the property gets its water. And I'll set up rain harvesting systems. My goal is to set up a roughly 20,000 gallon tank on the top of the hill, pump water to that during the wet season, and use that to irrigate, and also build a fire system in case we have fire. So again, I've been working with this former firemen, and we're going to be building out systems for that. So all that to say, I've got a lot that I'm going to be working on over the next few months, and I keep having to pace myself because I wake up and I'm like, let's do 100 different projects. And I'm like, okay, we can do one thing at a time. So I am actively doing a lot of projects over the next few weeks, and I'll be documenting that. As always, let me try to end on a positive note. And again, I shared what's happening in the world, what's happening in my world. And again, I've had some talks with a lot of individuals here lately, offline subscribers, other large prepper channels. And again, I'm trying to stay optimistic. I'll put it this way. I like to try to bring a balanced view on this channel. I try to be encouraging. I don't like to get into hardcore fear. I know we all see an uncertain world ahead of us, and I think that's the best way to express it. And we can take that anxiety and we can sit in it, and we can stew in it, and we can just woe is me. But as you'll always hear me every week, what do I say? You're not a victim. You have time to prepare. As long as you have breath in your lungs, as long as you have the opportunity, be about it, and be about the business of preparing. And that's all I'm focusing on right now, is trying to prepare myself, my family for a future that looks to have a lot of challenges. But I'm not discouraged, because as preppers, this is what we live for. So again, you got time, take advantage of it. And I will be documenting a lot of what I'm doing. I'm going to try to make this process on my property as practical as possible to take people through what I'm learning. As I mentioned a second ago, the scientist that we're bringing in, her specialty is working with farmers. And a lot of what I'll do in the next few months is have her help me evaluate the climate that I'm in, where things are going to head in the future, and determine what we'll plant based on that, and then bring her in to consult on this channel to help you understand that as well. So we've got a lot of things that we're working on behind the scenes, but stay encouraged and be about it. As always, stay safe out there.